Welcome. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones. Our program is about to begin.
Despite the best intentions, 60% of unsolicited goods donated after a disaster end up in landfills. And with 70% of post-disaster giving occurring in the first 2 months, there's little support for long-term recovery. In 2019, Good 360 announced a Clinton Global Initiative commitment to action to educate leaders from Fortune 500 companies about how to redesign their post-disaster corporate giving to best meet the needs of affected communities. Now, nearly 100 organizations have pledged to implement corporate giving programs that are needs-based, both immediate relief and long-term recovery focused, and transparent. And as a continuation of this effort, Good 360 is committing to work with companies to donate $500 million in surplus goods to the highest need communities over 2 years, while in the process diverting 40 million pounds of waste from entering landfills. This means that crisis-affected communities will have access to the support and resources they need for their recovery long after the news cycle has moved on. I hope you'll join Good 360 in rethinking your organization's approach to corporate philanthropy.
Please welcome to the stage, Yotam Pulitzer.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Yotam Pulitzer, and I'm the CEO of IsraAid, which is a non-governmental humanitarian organization out of Israel. We respond to crises. We typically send a team in the first 72 hours, but more importantly, we're not only first in, we're last out. So we're staying when we work in areas of crisis for 5 and sometimes even 10 years to help communities become more resilient. A lot of our focus is on island nations. We have been working in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in different countries. We arrived after hurricanes or cyclones, but we stay to work side by side with the community. And before I kind of share my remarks, I want to share with you something that's really sits on me. And that is the fact that we only hear about these beautiful countries in 2 occasions: when we plan our next vacation or when they get hit by a hurricane or a cyclone. Unfortunately, when they get hit, the attention is very limited. And we know that media attention equals to donor attention, equals to volunteer attention, equals to political attention. But the attention is typically for 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week, and then people move on to the next tweet. Unfortunately, for the communities living in these island nations, climate change is already here. They are already suffering from the consequences of climate change. And I think in this session, you'll have a chance to hear from many of these leaders from these communities. So I want to share with you a quick story about our work in Dominica. Not Dominican Republic, Dominica. It's a country, it's a beautiful country in the Caribbean. There are 70,000 people there. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria hit Dominica and destroyed 95% of the island. We arrived there right after the hurricane, and we are still there. We are still there working side by side with the community and with the government and with philanthropists. The most important one is the Beverly Foundation. And we work side by side with them to make sure Dominica is the first climate resilient nation. And what does it actually mean? It means that we need to work on education. We need to help the schools prepare for future disasters. We need to help the health system. We need to help livelihood. We work with tech companies. We want to make sure that people stay on the island and develop it further. I really want to thank CGI for giving me and us the opportunity to discuss and to share the resilient and the amazing communities we have on this island nation. Thank you very much.
Please join in welcoming Anthea McLaughlin.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm the CEO of Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, a women-led regional organization. And while the Caribbean accounts for a tiny part of greenhouse gas emissions globally, it's disproportionately more vulnerable to climate change. Rising sea levels erode the very shores that define us, while hurricanes, increasingly fierce and frequent, leave devastation behind. These challenges aren't just environmental, they're existential, especially for our women on the front lines. Caribbean women shoulder an unjustly heavy burden in the face of climate change, exasperated by long-standing inequities, and often endure displacement and grapple with restricted access to critical resources like land, credit, and technology. According to the World Bank, in some Caribbean countries, women own less than 20% of agricultural land. In 2019, the UN Convention urged gender inclusion for climate resilience and support to local organizations implementing gender-responsive strategies. And according to UN Women, women are more likely left behind, left out, and are caught up in a cycle of neglect. But this vulnerability is their strength. Without women, we know for sure that we cannot effectively combat climate change. Their unique perspectives, their roles and contributions are indispensable. And we will be working with implementing partners across the Caribbean to tap into the resilience, resourcefulness, and leadership that women bring to the table. We are announcing here today a Clinton Global Initiative commitment to action to raise $2 million for women-led initiatives by the end of 2024, and to double that fundraising target in 5 years. We'll be creating an ecosystem of philanthropy stakeholders to work together to analyze philanthropic distribution, funding in the region, starting with Tide Center Shared Innovative Funder Database. We will convene Global North, the Global South, philanthropic communities to bridge funding gaps and streamline resources for organizations that provide gender-responsive services. And we will also encourage NGOs to collaboratively seek fundings together as a bloc, and of course, provide targeted capacity building and training resources to women who engage in innovative solutions to combat climate change. So we all know that Caribbean women are resilient solution builders, vital for our environmental sustainable future. So let's invest in them to ensure a more climate resilient Caribbean. So thank you so much.
Please give a warm welcome to Fernando Zuniga.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Fernando Zuniga. I'm representing today MPC Capital. And today I'm honored to present the progress of our commitment to action. Back in 2020, at the CGI conference in Puerto Rico, we committed to raise and invest 90 million USD in renewable energy projects across the Caribbean basin. Since then, we have made progress in achieving our commitment. First of all, our MPC Caribbean Clean Energy Fund has been investing in renewable energy projects in the region, including solar projects in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, and wind farms in Costa Rica. Secondly, in 2021, we launched MPC Energy Solutions, a new renewable energy investment platforms, which raised 100 million USD from institutional investors, and we were able to list the company in the Oslo Stock Exchange. With this, we succeeded by raising additional 10 million USD from our original commitment. And with this, we have been able to keep developing and investing in renewable energy projects in other countries such as Puerto Rico, Mexico, Colombia, and St. Kitts. We have also allocated other investments in other infrastructures, and we're willing to do more in the coming years. We believe that everyone deserves access to reliable and affordable energy, and our commitment to action towards renewable energy in the Caribbean aims to achieve just that. We are very proud of our progress towards this goal and look forward to continuing our commitment towards a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Dennis O'Brien.
Honourable Minister Silk, fellow panellists and guests. Jacqueline Charles, thank you very much for moderating this session today. Jacqueline is the authoritative voice on everything to do with the Caribbean and has written also very widely on what's happening in Haiti. I'm pleased to be opening this important conversation on island nations, which are the world's most vulnerable communities and sit on the front lines of the global climate change and crisis. These countries have urgent needs in their race to prepare for the future, adapt to the present, and respond to multiple current crises. Today, many of these countries are incubators of innovation, offering promising lessons and approaches to inform the rest of the world on how to cope with climate change. At Digicel, we've invested in most of the island states in the Caribbean and also the Pacific region. And these countries and regions are disproportionately impacted by climate crisis. Sadly, wealthy nations have polluted the world, and islands are bearing the frontline brunt of this. Yesterday, at President Clinton's roundtable, I said that 40 million people are living in a washing machine. Each year, with a greater frequency of storms and stronger forces, the people of the Caribbean suffer more than anywhere else in the world. Before, during, and after a disaster, reliable communications are essential. This allows first responders, government agencies, and organizations to work together efficiently to support communities affected. Timely and accurate communication can save lives, and we've seen multiple examples of this over the last 20 years. Clear instructions and warnings can help people evacuate dangerous areas and seek shelter where necessary. Effective communication also helps in the allocation of emergency resources such as water, food, medical supplies, and personnel. It prevents a duplication of efforts and ensures that resources are distributed where they are most needed. After a hurricane, communication is also essential for coordinating efforts to restore critical infrastructure and expedites the recovery process in general. Digicel plays a role in providing emergency services during and after disasters for our customers. We work to ensure that our mobile networks remain operational or are restored on average between 4 and 6 hours in affected areas. Over the years, Digicel has collaborated with disaster response organisations, in fact some of them are in this room, including government agencies and NGOs, to provide communication support and resources during crises, and has prioritised engaging with local communities to understand their specific needs. From chairing the Clinton Global Initiative Haiti Action Network in the aftermath of the 2008 hurricane and the devastating earthquake in 2010, we have all learned the importance of focusing on the critical role of building long-term committed coalitions of partners to coordinate and deliver relief and respond to the needs at that time, but also the process of reconstruction. Similarly, I saw how collaborative response efforts worked across the Caribbean region in the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which caused so many countries and communities unimaginable loss. Nations like Dominica and Antigua and Barbuda faced the overwhelming challenges of providing immediate life-saving support through restoration of power and urgent medical needs, while also turning their attention to the unprecedented task of rebuilding in places at far too frequent risk of further disasters. Unfortunately, despite the Caribbean and the Pacific Islands' low impact on the actual causes of climate change, they are enduring the most climate disruptions, which continue to increase in numbers and gravity. Wealthy countries are literally wrecking poor island states. Building resiliency is expensive, and the cost of recovery from natural disasters even more so, putting many of these countries in debt and encouraging increased migration in the region. In 2017 alone, Dominica lost the equivalent of 253% of its GDP because of Hurricane Maria. This was just 2 years after it lost the equivalent of 92% of its GDP during Hurricane Erika. It's very difficult to see how island states with debt to GDP of more than 80 to 100% can actually fund projects paying an interest rate of 14% to build resilience in their countries. So something has to give. There needs to be a new order, new thinking around this. Otherwise, these communities will never build and prepare for the disasters of the future. Nonetheless, because island nations are seeing the realities of climate change play out daily, and from facing more frequent disasters to grappling with longer-term climate impacts on their economies, environments and social infrastructure, they know what is at stake, and they are already stepping up to act. Sadly, not many people in the wealthy world care that much about island states, but hopefully this is changing. I'm delighted to see the commitment from countries such as Jamaica, Barbados, Dominica and the Bahamas, who stand out for their ambitious plans to reduce their emissions and invest in more climate-resilient infrastructure. We can all learn from them. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing more from the leaders of this session now. Thank you.
Please join in welcoming Jacqueline Charles.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm a reporter at the Miami Herald. I cover the Caribbean, and I actually happen to be from a small island that is also at risk of climate change. I'm usually the person that goes in after the disaster. Today, I'm excited, though, about this panel, this discussion, because while we've heard a lot of doomsday scenario about disappearing islands, rising, sea levels and warming temperatures. The reality also is that in a lot of these places, people aren't sort of waiting for that to happen, and they're taking action. And so I'm just going to introduce you to our panel so we can get on with our conversation. First, we're going to have the Honorable John Silk, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Marshall Islands, if he can come up. Then we also have Aholotu Palo, who is the CEO of Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Company. Please come up. And then we have Deanna James, President of St. Croix Community Foundation. And we also have Jeremy Ragan, who's a youth activist and climate justice activist. So if all of you can come up, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start with you, Minister Silk, because every time we hear about the Marshall Islands, it's always sort of this doomsday scenario. But beyond your commitment for 100% renewable energy by 2059, what else is taking place there to mitigate against the risk of climate change?
Well, good morning to you and good morning to all of you, the audience. Thank you for inviting me to this important panel of discussion. One of the things that we have been working on, and we're hopeful that we'll launch it at the in the next few months at the in UAE, is our what we call our National Adaptation Plan, which is really our survival plan. We call it our survival plan. And in it, it includes a lot of steps, plans that we need to implement in order to basically make sure that we don't have to migrate from our country. A part of that includes building seawalls. But building seawalls, the Marshall Islands, just to give you an example, Marshall Islands the islands are spread out over 800,000 square miles of water. And most are 2 meters above sea level, all the islands. So it's very, if you want to build a seawall, you have to decide which island to build a seawall on, which island to save, and which islands to let go, because you're talking billions of dollars if you're going to invest in seawalls to make sure that the sea level rise doesn't come up and wash over the islands. But even if you build seawalls, with the sea level rise, it may come through the any leakage in the wall and inundate the islands itself. So in that plan, we also anticipate the issue of what do we do with how do we address the issue of loss and damage, because loss to us is not just financial losses, economic loss, but cultural loss. If people have to migrate from their own home island to another place, even in the part of the Marshall Islands, because our culture is based on where we are from and which island we're from. So even if you go to another part of the Marshall Islands where we build a seawall and we bring our people there, they will never feel at home, because it's not where they were born, it's not where their culture is from. So that's one of the things that we are trying to factor into the question of loss and damage. How do we decide at what point during this crisis we decide that we have to let go of some islands? And how do we explain to our population that we have to move you from that island to this island because we can't save all of the islands?
Wow. Deanna, this is very familiar to you because you also, not just in your work in St. Croix at USVI, but you also have traveled and this issue has come up. But I'm wondering, in the grant making that you guys are doing at the USVI, what are some innovative ways that you're finding that community-based organizations are trying to mitigate against this risk and respond?
So I think less of focus on specific individual initiatives and more focus on ways of being. And so one of the things that's really interesting about St. Croix Foundation is that we were founded in disaster. We were founded on the heels of Hurricane Hugo. And when I joined the foundation, and then years later, I'm now heading the foundation, I didn't really understand the incredible wisdom of our founders in designing community philanthropy differently, and really centering our work around building social infrastructure. So we serve as the primary fiscal sponsor for nonprofit organizations, and really recognizing the role of philanthropy in building a really strong third sector. One of the things that I did when I took over the helm of the foundation was to go deeper than just fiscal sponsorship and building a consortium of nonprofits and inviting over 50 nonprofits to sit in a room together to begin building trust and collaborative culture. And we had launched that initiative almost exactly a year to the day of Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria was really enlightening and illuminating for me also to understand like how powerful our founders were in thinking through what our community needed a philanthropy to look like. They built really resilient systems around the foundation in terms of like solar powered our headquarters. They asked the government to bury all the utilities around our headquarters in a central part of a historic town. And immediately after Hurricane Maria, all of the nonprofits that we had started convening on our office, and our office became a hub. And it was really a transformative experience for us to sit in a room, organizations in 4 different sectors: youth and education, health and human services, the environment, and arts and culture, sitting in one space and trying to figure out like big problems together.
Did you find that government responded to the requests? Did the government, like for instance, burying the utility
Oh, yes,
lines?
they did. Yes, so we worked with government to do that. And that had been done actually 10 years prior to Hurricane Maria. And so to sort of really understand our role as not being sort of this siloed, thought leader, but also, and more importantly, a convener and a facilitator for community organizations to actually come together and to be able to hold space for them to think through problems. And so almost every single investment we made, every single initiative that came out of that space of deep collaboration was ended up being some of the most successful things that the organization had done in our 33 years of being in service. And what was really powerful is that we were sitting together trying to think through, solar and energy independence and thinking about food sovereignty and all these like really big issues together. And some dynamic initiatives came out of this around solar powering certain community centers. And we launched a farm stand initiative for our farmers who had almost no supports in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And it was challenging for us. In addition, is that the short attention span of national philanthropy is that all the focus was on Puerto Rico, not recognizing that St. Croix in particular had taken a direct hit from Category 5 Maria, while Puerto Rico got Category 4. And so we had to figure out a lot of things on our own without the national spotlight and without the national philanthropic investment. And the testimony of the way in which we work now is that the next crisis, as we were thinking through what we would invest in, we were thinking of the next hurricane and never conceiving that the next crisis would be a global pandemic. And yet every single investment that we made, the design of every single project that we conceived together provided the most important supports for vulnerable populations during COVID. And so what an incredible testimony of not just what we conceive, but how we conceive and how we convene people to think through, because I think the lesson is that we don't know what the next crisis will be. And so we can sit here today and try to design the best, project or strategy for the last crisis. And if you haven't brought the people to a place of like being able to work together and to collaborate in a like really meaningful and trust-based way, I think all of our communities are even more vulnerable than they are now. And so I think for us, the investment that we've made since Maria is really how do we continue to hold this space? How do we build the trust? How do we really invest? And one of the things we've invested in is systems thinking, and how do we sort of move from a siloed and sort of approach to the work that we do and how we support our nonprofit partners, to really thinking of how do we invest in the intersections of all of their work and the interrelationship between how individual organizations are working.
Thank you. Jeremy, you've done a lot. You're on the ground, you've raised money, you've removed plastic from beaches and reprocessed a significant amount of collected litter. And the Seychelles are also being threatened. Do you see anything in what you've done or that's taking place that can be scaled up and exported elsewhere?
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I think with Seychelles and thinking of the larger community that are islands, I think it's been rightly pointed out, we're tiny in the sense of where we are and how small we are, but what we do is replicable. And I think a friend of mine yesterday, the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, and the Debt for Nature swap is something that we're already seeing. I believe it's in Belize and several other countries where we're seeing debt for nature swaps happen with the ocean. So that's something since 2012 going into 2014, and as of 2020, you see that process really get into a place where 30% of our ocean is now being protected, and we're now trying to find the money to basically protect this vast amount of ocean that is about the size of Germany. And I think with Seychelles, when we're talking about these large-scale things, we need to look at people on the ground and how they basically are involved with these things. So I know the Clinton Foundation has actually been very supportive with helping Seychelles establish its first floating solar power system, and one that's actually been tested out in a lagoon that is, got added challenges of being saline. So how do you basically have technology that's going to be resilient over time to things like the ocean, and how are small islands basically going to use these technologies to overcome structural barriers? Because for us, land is an issue. Being able to survive storms and slow onset events like sea level rise. These are things that we're going to have to plan over time. So there are many examples, but I think what I've really seen in the last year as part of the Alliance of Small Island States Fellowship is convening small island states together, learning from each other. So from our friends in the Pacific, from our friends in the Caribbean, our stories, in Seychelles and the Indian Ocean, we're not dissimilar. Seychelles might have a little bit of time, in terms of how these disasters are impacting us. It's not as if we're affected by hurricanes as it is in the Pacific, as it is in the Caribbean. But we look at these things and we say, what are we going to do? How are we learning from our brothers and sisters in these faraway places? And for the young people, I can really tell you, I'm 29, so I might be moving out of that category very quickly. But I've got friends who are, they look at these problems, they're not turned away from it. They're actually going straight into these things. So I have a great friend who's currently finding themselves within the UN Secretary General's team, advising and giving these kind of insights that I think if you're not coming from these islands, you're not able to see those case studies. So I think we're not staying quiet. I think we're not staying in our place. We're moving about. Some friends on the island still fighting the fight that needs to be fought. But we're moving around the world and making people know what we're doing.
Thank you. Hello to a lot's been said about insurance, and in this country we are dealing with it. I live in Florida, and I see my bill. Traditional insurance, you pay a premium, you get hit, and hopefully you get a payout. But you're into parametric insurance. Tell us about that and why you believe that it is part of the solution as opposed to the problem when we're talking about climate change.
Thank you, Jackie. Because this is the first time for me to attend this meeting, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to Clinton Global Initiative for inviting us to be here. representing the Pacific in this forum, and thank you also for the audience for coming in and listening. Before 2016, that's the year that the company was established by the leaders of the Pacific, there were two things was clearly in the mind of the Pacific at the time. One, there's a lack of understanding from educational perspective in terms of, there's a lack in the market. There's no one is providing parametric insurance, immediate liquidity, that's what it meant. Immediate liquidity transactions to the countries post-disaster. Within 10 days of post-disaster, that's the whole idea of parametric insurance. The product or the model being used is already pre-designed, predetermined based on a loss assessment, historical information. And then if disaster strike to that particular country, if they pay a premium and the triggers are activated, the transactions of the liquidity, it will initiate it immediately. But there was understanding. Two things also, it was also understanding at the time, because of the lack of education, so understanding parametric and also the lack in the market, the leader decided to establish this company. It was premised on something that we call scalable solutions. And that scalable solutions was also coming from a walk the dog approach. We can't sit around and do nothing in the Pacific while waiting for the global north to provide us the support. We have to create some sort of a vehicle so that they can mobilize resources, respond to disaster, and provide financial protections to our people on the ground. The scalable solution that we were using at the time was categorized into three areas: scale up, scale out, scale deep. Scale up meaning the company service that we offer to the countries has to be part of the policy conversation, has to be part of the policy designing and policy conversations on the ground, and also in the regional level and international level. And that's why I'm here, as part of the conversations, because for so many years we've been sitting in the islands, we haven't heard anyone who can get up and support us. We have to get up and support ourselves first before we reach out to the global north. Second, what I meant by scaling out, meaning that the policy of the service that we offer to the countries, it's inclusive. It's include everyone, not just for a particular segment, not just for sovereign product that we are providing, but also to private sectors, civil society, SOEs. Scale deep meaning that we have to change the service that we offer. We have to change the mindset of the people on the ground, our own citizens. Because when you speak about insurance, in their mind it's all about costs. Oh man, it's cost us so much. No, I won't pay in my insurance because I need to pay the education of my kids. I need to pay my social obligation, the family, the church, the religions, all these things. So there's also a second or maybe the last idea to pay your insurance. It's not really an insurance, it's a risk-pool insurance. We are established to provide, to take the risk of the countries, disaster risk, and then we send it to the international market. So we wanted, the leaders back then established the company for the fact to change that mindset, from being reactive to being more proactive. Our people in the region I think it's in our DNA with respect to the Honorable Minister of Marshall Islands. It's in our DNA that we just wait because a disaster happened, we just wait because donors will fly in their big ship with all the in-kinds, with all the cash, like what it was alluded to earlier on. When disaster strike, that's when the political attentions and the donor attentions target into that particular country. And then after a few days, they disappeared. So what we were doing right now, we established this company to make sure that we stay on ground and try to change the mindset. So we were established financially and technically supported by the World Bank. Now the World Bank have divorced us last December. We are independently operating right now. And then we are calling the global north because premium is getting expensive because we are going to the international market. If there's an intention to provide premium subsidizations, resources to us to subsidize the premium for the countries in the Pacific, Germany has agreed to give us 10 million euro, 9 million euro to the company, and that's for providing subsidizations for the premium for the countries in the Pacific. And Marshall Islands is also a member and a policy holder of the company. Thank you.
Great. We're going to go through a couple quick rounds of some questions I have for each of you. We're going to start with the word resilience, Honorable Minister. This word is used a lot, so much so that it has grown to encompass much more than just climate response. Some believe it is detriment to the response for help. What are your thoughts? Is it overused, the word resilience, when we talk about these islands?
No, resilience is an important word that actually is in our survival plan. Uh, let me premise what I'm going to say, because the Marshall Islands is kind of a unique situation. It's not really isolated like the rest of the Pacific countries, but it's also a survival in itself. We learned from the past. There were 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands from 1948 to 1946 to 1958. 67 nuclear tests. Some of us have had to move away from some of these islands to make way for the testing, and have never gone back. And some of us can't go back because the islands are contaminated. So we have learned, and we have part of our plan is to how to accommodate these people that can't go back. What do we do with their islands that are useless? These people are dispersed throughout the Marshall Islands and in the United States as well. And so for us, we have learned from the past, and we have incorporated what we have learned from the past into our survival plan. Because now we're not only faced with the legacy of the nuclear testing, but we're now faced with climate change and sea level rise. Sea level rise to us with 2 meters above sea level, that's a death warrant for us. So that's why we're trying to engage with the rest of the world to show the world that we are not sitting back and waiting for the world to help us. We are trying to help ourselves by learning from the past and putting into in fact, our survival plan, what they call it NAP, National Adaptation Plan, but for us it's a survival plan. And one of the islands that they use for the testing is called Bikini. Ironically, this is where the swimming trunk or the bikini, what you call it, bikini, came from. It's from that island. So really, those people in that island should get a royalty for that word. So that it's part of our plan to get some money for them because they can't go back. So we could use that money to help them live a different life. But yeah, I'm sorry if I took.
No, that's fine.
But I like this kind of conversation. I try to tell these stories because it's not stories that are trying to elicit sympathy from you. But these are facts that I want to present to all of you, so that we can work together. How can we accommodate? How can we help? How can we get the rest of the world, the government and private sector, contribute so that we can all work together to make sure that we don't leave our country? Because at the end of the day, you will never, even if you migrate to the United States or anywhere else, for our culture, you can't feel at home until you're back where your culture is, and you can't go anywhere. A number of us have migrated to the United States because they can't go back to their home island, like Bikini or Eniwetok, where the testing had taken place. I have a grandson. Lucky for us, he's not from Bikini or Eniwetok, but he's from the Marshall Islands. And when he was about 6 years old, he came to my house, which is right next to the ocean. So we were sitting there. It's a Sunday afternoon. We were sitting there, and it was kind of a season of the year when the waves are high. So the tides were high, and the waves came in all the way to near my house. And my grandson said, "Well, Grandpa, we should move somewhere. Your house is going to be under the water." I said, "Well, we have no place to go." So anyway, he's grown up. He's now in junior high. He's living in Hawaii with his parents. And so when I was coming here for this conference, UN, I stopped at his parents' place, and he was there, and he said, "Oh, Grandpa, where are you going?" And I'm going to the United States. I'm going to New York to attend these UN General Assembly and other meetings taking place there on climate. And we said, "Oh," and does that mean that we have a solution now? That the island won't sink?
Wow.
I don't know. It's going to take a long while to get there, but hopefully one day we will have the solution. But the solution right now is 1.5 to stay alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Deanna, USVI, I'm going to change my question for you because the minister brought up an important point. How do we get, countries like the US and others to pay attention and to do more? In 1 minute.
That's a difficult question. We have to demand more. I mean, I think that's a huge part of the challenge for us. And I always say that this colonial construct under which we exist in the U.S. Virgin Islands as a territory colony is both an opportunity and a challenge. A challenge because I think colonial consciousness yields complacency. And so the strategies that are being employed by island nations throughout the Caribbean that are independent have a much greater sense of urgency around them. So I sit here as an island in the Caribbean that is moving in the opposite direction that most islands in the Caribbean are moving in, where our government is fighting ferociously to restart an oil refinery. One of the largest oil refineries in the Western Hemisphere. I sit as a representative of an island that has been victim to one of the largest oil spills in American history, to the tune of 43 million gallons of oil that sits in underground freshwater aquifer. And so when I speak about the work that we're doing and the way that we exist in trying to support our nonprofits, those are the frontline soldiers that are fighting to disrupt and deconstruct old systems and to build new systems. And so we have become a lot more radicalized than I think traditional philanthropy because we have to be. And we do so at the risk of a highly punitive government. And so the way that we support our nonprofits, the way that we have to provide cover, Darren Walker talked yesterday about the risk aversion of national philanthropy. We don't have the luxury as a grassroots place-based foundation to operate like that. And so we are fighting to try to move in the direction that other independent islands in the Caribbean are moving, but it's a difficult exercise for us because of the colonial framework under which we exist in the Virgin Islands.
Thank you. Jeremy, I'm going to just amend the question for you a little bit because the Seychelles has really been at the forefront in terms of the blue economy. But yet, when we look at fishermen that are there, they've formed an association and they're still trying to figure out how to tap this money. And we see this in disaster responses, right? There's money that's being pledged or that's available, but it doesn't trickle down to the grassroots. So when we have that kind of reality, how do we get the outside world to pay attention, or even our own governments to do more?
I think the question here is one where, what do people see in Seychelles? I think it was brought out before in terms of it's a tourism destination, and this is where you go. But let's say we look at the industrial fisheries, and we look at skipjack and yellowfin, and they amount to quite a significant amount of what the EU basically consumes in terms of fish. And I think we have local scale fishermen, artisanal fishermen, who basically have fed their population, fed our country for a while, but they see these large purse seiners. We're talking huge boats, go throughout the sea and collect the tuna, but also collect endangered species, collect sharks, indiscriminately really having an impact on their ecosystem, our ecosystems, and on our livelihoods. So the blue economy is one, yes, that's fisheries. It's one that also is tourism, and we need to see how do these sometimes very extractive, sometimes it's service-oriented, hotels or fishing companies give back or reinvest. And I think it's been quite interesting that the government has put in place a sustainable tourism levy in that sense, where we're charging somewhere between $2 to $5 to $7 per night on a hotel room per person. And the introduction of this in Seychelles is not unique. I think there's about 41 other jurisdictions. I think Antigua and Barbuda, another one, has just actually passed this. And so we're seeing in a place like Seychelles, where we expect for our nationally determined contribution for climate adaptation is going to be something like 300 million, and the total with mitigation something like $600 million. To get there, we're seeing this levy, this tax, maybe add about somewhere between $15 to $20 million per year that the government Seychelles would not be able to collect otherwise. So for the same thing for tourism, we need to see that how these externalities that tourism or fisheries, how they have these impacts, how can they be returned into the country in terms of, reinvesting in adaptation and our resilience as we're talking about. And I think we really need to make people understand that, what ends up on our plate, what ends up being a holiday destination, how you're connected to it, that's just the invitation to understand what's going on. It's already taking place in some countries. I think in the US context, you look at a state like Florida, according to Deutsche Bank, after the next storm, it'll be uninsurable. So these things are, let's look at us, let's look at how we fit into your lives already, but understand this will be you soon. And what can you do to help us will help you in the future.
Thank you. Hello, too. What keeps you up at night?
That's a good question, Jackie. But let me start by trying to answer your questions by distinguishing traditional insurance and sovereign insurance. Yeah. We are not a traditional insurance that we offer policies to individuals for fire, car, or something like that. We don't do that. We only provide insurance cover to sovereign countries through governments. So government has to pay the premium to us, and then we take it to the market. And then if there's disaster strike and the triggers are activated, then transaction of the liquidity, immediate liquidity is initiated. So two things keep me awake at night. One, if there's a disaster and then there's no payout to the countries, because it's basically based on a trigger being redesigned, based on scientific and historical information on the ground. And then the politicians would love to hear if there's no payout, they will come and politicize the whole process. So that's the first one. Second, if a country comes back to us and say, we don't have the resources, given the response to the COVID, we have faced that. The countries come back to us and say, sorry, we don't have a penny to spare to cover for our premium. We'll be able to cover that from anywhere. So that's what we took to the countries like Germany, US, and UK to give us the resources so that we can subsidize. So these countries being financially protected. So we're lucky because of that opportunity provided by Germany. We are hoping that the Global North, the whole Global North, will be able to look at us as one of the solutions. We are not a panacea. We are not the only solution providing this in the region. The World Bank, ADB, and others are also providing that. But they are not the panacea of the whole to address the concern of the costs of this disaster. But we fully understand that. We are not the only solution, but we are one of the solutions can provide a quick liquidity. Because when it comes to building resilience, it's all about whether that country, particularly a persons or a country, have the ability to respond immediately post-disasters. So that's what I meant by building resilience. If you be able to have the resource to provide that you can be able to respond immediately to, the post-disaster, you can be able to regionalize your country and the people being affected. So that's the two things that get me awake in the night.
Thank you. Jeremy, young people today are very much focused, on this, on climate change and the activism. You talk a lot about climate justice. I mean, how do you define climate justice?
In the context of islands like Seychelles, you have to remember, looking back at our history, a lot of us were brought there against our will. And now we're being in a case where we'll leave against our will. And so when we think about justice, we have to accept that something wrong has happened, but we have to understand there's opportunity to either right that. And, a lot of what has happened around the UNFCCC process, around the, climate change talks, is 30 years of something like loss and damage being fought to be put onto the agenda. And, this outdates my life. But now we're starting to see something like this mechanism put on the agenda. And I think it's really important for us not to look at this as only a way to, it shouldn't just be seen as compensation or reparations, but it can be a mechanism for what we talk about polluters pay. Why are we allowing subsidies to go, to the tune of 300 billion a year, 600 billion a year to some of the most profitable companies in the world when we're thinking about it? That is injustice. That taxpayers' money should be going to protect people in their countries or otherwise outside of the countries. So justice really understands that something has happened, and we have the opportunity to do something, and we need to shift our mindsets, shift our resources and our priorities to what's right. And I think that's not unprofitable that's actually an opportunity to really save what we have.
Deanna, when you're working with grassroots groups in the USVI, and we're listening to the minister talk about the Marshall Islands, it's not just the disappearing of an island, but culture. You know, when we're in these islands, we're related, we're connected. Do people get it? Do they understand that the impact of climate change is not just the buildings falling or, you know, the disaster, but that the threat, the fabric?
Absolutely. I think part of like that oil refinery that I mentioned is such a huge story for St. Croix because the government, both federal and local government, destroyed thousands of acres of agricultural land that farmers were trying to plan on and to build an agriculture industry, to build a refinery. And so there is this deep-seated understanding of what was lost and what the cost has been now, 60 years later. And so I think that the culture, I think of people, particularly on the island of St. Croix, which is the largest of the 3 Virgin Islands, and has been the sacrifice zone for the entire territory, where an industrial, development took place mainly on the island of St. Croix. There is a deep connection to land. And so what is happening every single day, just record heat, sea level rise, I think people on the island of St. Croix in particular are very acutely aware of what is at stake. And so, and deeply connected to ancestral ways of being and thinking about like what well-being is for us as islanders and as African descendants.
All right. Thank you guys very much for joining us. I mean, this is a conversation. It's an important conversation. I wish it could be longer because I think that there's so much more to say beyond, what we've been talking about, the big issue in terms of getting countries to, to address what's happening in these islands and understanding, how fertilizer use and, the Midwest is affecting fishermen in St. Croix or elsewhere. So again, I want to thank our guest, Honorable Silk. Thank you so much. This has been very enlightening with the Marshall Islands and what's going on. Deanna James, USVI, continue your work. Hello to, I'm going to be looking very carefully now with parametric insurance, but we'll be talking about that. And Jeremy, I mean, thank you, in terms of being a young person and being on the front lines of this and your activism. It is greatly appreciated. And again, thank you everyone for joining us here this morning.
Thank you for joining this session. Please make your way to the next session at the main stage.
Hey yeah, hey yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So if you really want to listen to the Pro Tools, I gotta send you a listen bus back.